Folks, as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. And this weekend, it definitely did as Xavier lost to Texas in the Sweet 16 and the Reds and Guardians leave Arizona to start off the regular season. While they look back at the good old times, FC Cincinnati looks to remain in the good old days as they head to Nashville, hoping to keep their unbeaten streak alive. And Columbus looks to get a result as they return home. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Buckeye Sports Breakdown, a show about sports teams from the great state of Ohio. I'm Ahirson Hassan, and thanks for tuning in. No quick hits today. We'll get right to the action, and we'll start off with the Xavier Musketeers. Another great saying out there, don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. And knowing what we saw from the Musketeers this year, what we saw is going to happen for a long time. I'll tell you this. When I heard Sean Miller was going to be Xavier's coach again, I knew it was going to be something special. And boy, was it. Of course, had a great stint at Xavier. We knew what he was capable of when we saw him in Arizona, where it felt like the Wildcats were at least going to the Elite Eight or the Sweet 16, almost felt like almost every single year. And for Sean Miller and crew, definitely used his philosophy in Arizona to transfer it back to Xavier, where he had coaching stint over there in the 2000s. Definitely showed it. But I think it goes beyond Sean Miller's philosophy, especially for a team that was lacking it after Chris Mack left. It's respect to the seniors that make this team possible. I mean, you look at guys like Soleil Boom, Jack Nungy, even Adam Kunkel, who for most of the season played almost like a fourth or a fifth guy in terms of offensive production, really stepped it up when it came to the tournament. Of course, had experience in the big dance before a lot of the other guys as he played there when he was with Belmont. But nonetheless, back to my point, just great leadership, great crew all around. It felt like this team was able to take a big step forward in terms of production, in terms of chemistry. That too, you should note that you had Nungy and Jones who were there last year as well. A lot of these guys who have been in the Travis Steele era where it seemed a little shaky at times whether or not they were going to do something. And they definitely showed up late in that season, and especially in this season as well. Again, a lot to be proud of. Looking at the game against Texas, I remember I did a live react for this game. You can check it out on YouTube. And I remember just saying, this feels like the Marquette game all over again in the Big East Championship, where Xavier had some chances on offense, but they were just swarmed by what was a really good defense and couldn't get any shots up and running. I mean, Soleil Boom only had 2 points. Jack Nungy, albeit did pretty well down low, but probably missed, I'd say, a good 4 or 5 layups that in any other case he would have gotten. So again, I would have to say just subpar production overall. I think more from the offensive side earlier on, and then it kind of haunted them as the second half went on. Ended up losing only by 12, so they were able to make the dividends, score them more points in the second half. But of course, as I said, not enough to pull off the win. So yeah, that I think it definitely got there. And I remember saying in my preview for Xavier, if whether or not they're going to be a Final Four and national title contender, I said, here's the problem with Xavier. They're a team that shows great instincts. They like to show hope, but it doesn't feel like you get a real good sense of command in this team, where somehow along the way, shots are not going up. They're making stupid turnovers. They're losing the ball in key situations. And it was a case in Kennesaw State. They kind of cleaned it up against Pitt. And then the problem showed again against Texas. So I think that's where I kind of saw it. And I remember seeing that game and I remember thinking, well, this is what I kind of expected, not at that moment, but throughout the season, I was like, yep, well, this isn't new for this team. And I think that might be one thing to look at for Xavier and for Sean Miller and crew is how do they go beyond this and try to get at least some sort of consistency going forward. Again, it will be interesting to see for the Musketeers whether or not they have a chance to maybe make a run back, knowing that you'll probably have Adam Kunkel leaving. You might have Jack Nungy leaving. Soleil Boom might leave as well. He is a graduate student, but he is listed as a senior on the roster. So you have a lot of these other guys stepping in. Jerome Hunter also listed as a senior. So you're basically almost in ways kind of resetting the lineup where we saw Cam Kraft late in the game against Texas. The freshman couldn't be making some appearances. 6'6" guard, too. That's pretty tall for a guard, I'll tell you that. Desmond Claude, also there, another freshman. So we could easily see what could be a very young roster for Xavier. A lot of freshmen, as I mentioned. Michael Wolf is a freshman. Ian Saber, and that too, the Hamilton native, played for Baden for a while. So a lot of guys who could be stepping out. And then, of course, led by Colby Jones, who's really going to be the only key player returning to this squad. But it's going to be really interesting to see, one, can Xavier still be a contender with the pieces they have? But I think more importantly, who can they get on the transfer portal that's really good right now? I mean, just looking at the guys they have, I mean, not to mention, I mean, I don't want to be biased. I'm wearing an ASU sweatshirt right now. I go to ASU, but maybe you get a guy like DJ Horn out there that can fit in a Xavier roster. So those are the questions that the Musketeers have to ask themselves. And again, if you were to ask me right now, if the Musketeers can be a contender, my answer would be no. Can they make March Madness? Yes. Yes, they can definitely make March Madness if they're tough in Big East play. And they're definitely showing that. They have that command that's still there. And Sean Miller is still a great coach who can work with key assets. I think the problem with this team becomes, do you have the talent to back that up? Soleil Boom carried this team at points. Same with Jack Nungy. Again, you still have Colby Jones, but at the same time, didn't really show himself, save for the DePaul game, didn't really show himself that much in the Big East Championship, nor he did in March Madness. That was more on Hunter and Kunkel doing the work, both of which presumably will be leaving the squad after this year. So a lot of key pieces for Xavier will be missing, but nonetheless, like I said, great season. And it's great to have that joy back, right? It felt like for a while that Ohio was just never in that spot where they had so good college basketball teams. I think back to 2012 when all four teams representing Ohio made the Sweet 16. One of them, Ohio State, beat, I believe it was Cincinnati in the Sweet 16, ended up making it to the Final Four. That still stands as the last time an Ohio team went to the Final Four. And it just felt like it's great in Ohio to see that type of joy back in the state, especially when it comes to college basketball. You have a contender, you have great players, you have great coaches. And I think that's the joy that Xavier gave. It almost feels like, for me, that's what I love about my job, is you can say, you know what? This is a team that can win it all. This is a team that could make the Final Four. It's something big. Something very big overall. So we go from Xavier and we're heading to Sean Miller's former state in Arizona, albeit not Tucson. It's going to be here in Phoenix, where you have the Reds and the Guardians going up. Again, the Reds have done pretty well this year in the spring training session. That is 14-12, the Guardians 10-14. Again, spring training is nuanced in many ways, in the sense that you have your main players there, but you also have guys that are on the farm teams, which include a lot of interesting come-ups and prospects for either side. And I want to note a few, because for both the Guardians and the Reds, there were some interesting aspects for both of them. I'll start off with the Guardians first. This week, their only loss was to the Dodgers. And their one guy who's really showed out this year, Hunter Gaddis, 5 appearances on the year, 13 innings, 17 strikeouts, only a 2.77 ERA. So a lot to be proud of with this kid. Again, might not be in the starting rotation. I checked for Cleveland. So he's going to be when he could make the jump. I don't know when he could make the jump, but his ETA is apparently supposed to be this year. So there is a chance that he could make that chance and we could see him check in. And I think for Cleveland too, that's especially helpful when you look at their pitching core right now. I talked about this when spring training started. You got guys like Quantrill, Bieber, McKenzie, many more on that squad who can really go the distance and can strike out guys. That's really showed out, and I think Gaddis is a great addition. For the Guardians, he's a keeper right there. For the Reds, also pretty good as well. 4-2 in the past 7 days. Their key guy has been Christian Encarnacion Strain, the number 7 product overall in the organization. Expected ETA of 2024. Again, it has been interesting on where he could play and what's the legacy of him, as he currently plays third base. could be playing first, as has been the case in spring training. And I think what David Bell and the Reds organization wants to do is basically make Encarnacion Strand the successor to Joey Votto. Votto is on the last year of his contract. And essentially, after this year, he could end up leaving the Reds. He could end up retiring. There are some rumors he could go to the Blue Jays and retire in his home country of Canada. So again, the question becomes for Encarnacion Strand is, where do you play? And I think what's the production? Well, I'll tell you what, production has been great. 15 of 26 in the at-bats, a .577 average. That too in spring training, really, really good. Really good. 4 home runs, 13 RBIs. Nothing more to say. This guy is a keeper. This guy is a keeper, much like a lot of the guys on the squad. I know a lot of people talk about, oh, this Reds team is going to be great in a few years. Give them some time and they're going to be great. And maybe it happens. I honestly think so. If you have guys like Ellie De La Cruz on that squad, and now you got Encarnacion Strand, who allegedly could be Joey Votto's successor, that's a great start. That's a great start to a rebuild for the Reds. I'd be really excited to see what happens and what goes down in those next few years and how they start up opening day. Speaking of which, I will be doing a special opening day episode, which will be released sometime either Wednesday night or on Thursday, previewing both the Guardians and the Reds, their opening series, and the opening day as well. I'll be going to a break, and when I come back, I'll be talking about MLS, Columbus Crew, and FC Cincinnati trying to keep the good times rolling, or in the case of Columbus, trying to get back into the result column. So we talked Xavier, we talked spring training, and now we're talking MLS, who continues their spring to fall season in the regular season. Some interesting games later tonight, interesting games last week for both Columbus Crew and FC Cincinnati. I'm Harrison Hassan, and thanks for tuning in to Buckeye Sports Breakdown. We'll start off with Columbus Crew first. They will be playing Atlanta at home today after losing to New York Red Bulls on the road 2-1. It was an interesting game, as in the Red Bulls did not have their star player Lewis Morgan, but the Columbus Crew did not have their star player, their striker Cucho Hernandez, out there. So it was kind of an even game per se overall. And it was interesting to see how that team functioned without Cucho, as you had Lucas Celarayan, who is usually your number 10, playing the attacking midfielder role today, or rather last week. And I'll tell you this, it was a really interesting game in terms of how Columbus got their goal. They got the opening goal where it was, I think it was Alex Matan who got it, catching Carlos Cornell off his guard and just sliding it home from about 25 yards out. Beautiful goal in the sense that Matan made a great run on the wings. And we're starting to see that be part of Wilfred Nancy's philosophy, is try to get them on the wings a little bit. And New York Red Bulls, a kind of direct team, not just direct, but a possessive team in MLS, they really showed their strength as well. It felt like Columbus was defending for a majority of that first half, and then were able to get on the counter, get that one opportunity, and they were able to slot it away. You have to give credit to Eloy Room for just playing well in that first half, remaining level-headed throughout. But even a great goalkeeper cannot save from some silly defending once in a while. And we saw that from Columbus as well. Corey Burke scored the first goal for New York Red Bulls. And I think it was, or rather it was not Corey Burke. Sorry, it was, I think it was Luquinhas that scored the goal. But Corey Burke had a great dribble right into the middle, going up against Eloy Room. He was in the clear. There were about 3 defenders that were on him. And Luquinhas, who was making a separate run, had nobody on him. Again, Burke's shot was saved by Room, but the rebound's put in right through because nobody is guarding Luquinhas there in the middle. Again, a very simple goal from the New York Red Bulls, able to electrify that squad. And indeed, it was Luquinhas with the goal, but Corey Burke was able to make the dribble. Probably gets 90% of it just for great skill, but at the same time, you have to mark your man. It's kind of the conundrums of soccer where, you're like, this is a great guy. He's great on the ball. He can dribble. So you put 3 guys on him, but his buddy over there is missing, right? I mean, we've seen it with teams like Argentina where, Lionel Messi gets a Jesus treatment to some extent where he's got like 4 guys on him. But if he can dribble away and pass it to someone who's wide open, Argentina's still going to score the goal. It doesn't matter if Messi scores or not. Argentina is still up 1-0. And again, we saw that for the Red Bulls. And the same thing happened on the second goal as well, albeit it came off a cross, but Van Zier scored his first ever goal in MLS. And again, simply put, nobody was guarding him on the back post. Again, this is where communication really helps a team out, especially if you're Columbus overall. And again, boy will they need it. Boy, will they need it against Atlanta. And they are lucky that Thiago Almada is right now with Lionel Messi on international break right now, because otherwise this might turn into a bloodbath for Columbus, knowing what we saw last week from the Crew and last week from Atlanta United. Beat Portland 5-1 at home. Caleb Wiley, Araujo, and Giacomakis all scoring goals, and then Almada with the brace, albeit one of them was from the penalty spot. Again, this Atlanta team, when you look at the type of players they have, you know, you have your engine there in the middle. You're starting to get your striker going in Araujo. It's reminding me of the 2018 Atlanta United team when you have Miguel Almiron and Joseph Martinez. Just guys who can get on the ball, just attack right down your throat, and definitely be there in the middle of play. And I think for Columbus, their center backs were tested last week and they messed up in key situations. Simply put, they got to show up. They got to show up in those big moments. Again, you'll have a little bit of a home field advantage. You'll be playing in the coolish weather of Columbus, Ohio, not in the indoor stadium that is often seen with Atlanta United. They actually play in the Falcon Stadium, if you don't know. If you know, now you know. It's actually kind of sort of a windy day today. High will be in around the 60s, but lows should be around the 50s come match time. So it will be an interesting game so far from a weather perspective. Actually, in Columbus, it will be cooler. It'll be around 45 degrees at kickoff and windy. So weather conditions will definitely favor Columbus, including Warriors that are there in the middle. To my knowledge, I don't think Cucho or Zelarayan's on international duty. I could be wrong. I don't think Zelarayan would be on duty, but definitely could see Cucho going. But either way, from what we saw, I think Columbus has got to harness that home field advantage, make sure their defense is set, and they've got a result, at the very least, and maybe a win. So there's Columbus. And now down the I-71, we go to FC Cincinnati. They were also on the road last week. They drew Chicago Fire 3-3 in a frigid night at Soldier Field. 25 degrees it was outside. First time in franchise history they've come back from being 2 goals down. And again, I talked about some of the key players, and one guy asked me at one time, he was doing an interview for one of his classes, and he asked, who are some key players to the squad? And I said, here's the thing. It's the 3 guys up top, Lucho Acosta, Brandon Vasquez, and then Brenner, who is sometimes ousted by Sergio Santos in that spot, as we've seen this year. But back to my point, it almost feels like it's hard in this squad to overlook Junior Moreno. Of course, Acosta's your captain, just pinging balls left, right, and center. That too, great assist. Great assist by Acosta on the second goal. Might be assist of the year for the squad. But at the same time, you have guys like Junior Moreno, an A2, not necessarily a motor like Obino Wobodo who plays 6, but at the same time, just seems to have that class to go up in the attack, always be kind of like a second helper in ways. And we definitely saw it against Chicago, just right in the space, right in the box area. And he's able to score 2 goals. And I will say personally, watching this team week in, week out, they are much deserved goals for Junior Moreno. Again, it kind of sucks for you're facing a hostile Nashville side. And again, Moreno's not there, as he'll be on international duty for Venezuela. Again, a much deserved call up for him and shows potential of what he can do this season. Again, Angulo also made his first debut for the Orange and Blue. He will also be on international duty for his country, which is Ecuador. Again, for my one thing with FC Cincinnati, again, we haven't seen it throughout the season, but the Pours definitely showed last week, was it definitely happened on the goals. Again, don't get me wrong, Chicago scored some great goals. Now, don't get me wrong, Chichos had a penalty converted, but Castro Stroko, great goal. Chris Mueller, great goal. Those two guys who have also been in the MLS for some time and have been scoring great goals for a few years as well. They're quality players, but there's a punishing aspect to those goals in the sense that not only were they great finishes and Roman Celentano can't do much about it, but the fact that the defense just kind of let up at the wrong moment. I mean, actually, after Schvilko's goal, where he kind of popped a curler, Matt Miazga was just yelling at his guys saying, "What in the world are we doing in this moment?" And that's my point for FC Cincinnati is just don't be lazy in those moments. It almost feels like they kind of go into that auto-tune in ways on the road. Haven't seen it much this year, but it definitely showed against Chicago. Again, I'll tell you this too. In terms of how this game panned out, I am very surprised this game ended out 3-3 for two reasons. I'm impressed, one, because the offensive potential saves this team. And when I talk about offensive potential, I talk about Lucho Acosta because that guy is an engine for this side. I go back to that Hell is Real matchup against Columbus, where he was suspended, couldn't play, and the offense looked absolutely dud in that game. Nothing seemed to be going their way. And then you fast forward to today, he's pinging balls left, right, and center, pinged Sergio Santos to get Santos the goal, was able to pull it back to make it 3-2 there in the, I think it was the 84th minute. Again, really close ones. But I mean, offsides call regardless. You have to give credit to Chicago Fire's goalkeeper. I think his last name was Brady. I don't know what's happening in Chicago. They might be just churning out a factory of good goalkeepers left, right, and center. Of course, they had Gaga Slonina, who's now with Chelsea and made some starts with the U.S. men's national team in January. Again, I don't know what it is, but he played out of his mind. And this FC Cincinnati team played like their hair was on fire on the offensive side, especially towards that second half. And that's the energy this team needs playing against a Nashville side. Again, much warmer weather than what we saw in Chicago last week, but a much more hostile environment. Again, I don't know what it is, but Nashville SC has been making this game such a big deal, probably 10 times more of a big deal than FC Cincinnati has. Cincinnati's put out one tweet in terms of like between Sunday and Wednesday. Nashville put out like a whole thread and said, here are our games, USL and MLS combined. I don't know what it is, but I guess I'm intrigued. It's going to be a fun game. And it's also going to be free on Apple TV. So if you can, tune in because that's going to be a fun one. And I think for that one too, you don't have the midfield in the sense you don't have Angulo, you don't have Moreno, and Yu Yakubo is injured. So we'll see what Pat Noonan does in terms of that number 8 spot. But other than that, should be a great battle. Again, I think my one impetus for this rivalry, and we're going to see it in the narrative of this game, is the power ranking. FC Cincinnati is number 2 in MLS right now, and they're the highest in the Eastern Conference because LAFC is number 1 right now. That is really good, even with a team that dropped points. That is, when I mean drop points, I mean they only got a draw on the road. And that too, you have a team like St. Louis, who is an expansion squad that has won all 4 games to start off the year. Again, something that no team can say, let alone an expansion squad. So props to what St. Louis has done to start off their campaign in MLS. But back to FC Cincinnati, if you really want to be the number 2 ranking, show it, because Nashville's coming at you. Again, to preface this, you had these teams facing off in the USL in 2018. 2019, FC Cincinnati makes the jump to MLS. 2020, Nashville makes the jump, but there are some problems as you don't have COVID. 2021, FC Cincinnati is pretty irrelevant. So again, there's not too many results per se, or at least it's not like good team against good team. And then, of course, last year, Nashville was in the Western Conference. Nashville's back in the Eastern Conference this year, which means got an interesting battle, and we could see this being a potential playoff matchup down the stretch. I'll be interested to see how this one ends up. I'll say that it will be a draw. Nashville's going to come in firing, especially knowing Hani Mukhtar, the reigning MVP, in his position. You've got Alex Mule and Schaffelberg there on the wings for Nashville. Great fiery guys who can score goals as well, especially Schaffelberg. It's going to be very interesting. I'm intrigued. I think it ends out in a 2-2 draw. It's going to be a thriller we're going to remember for a while. Once again, that's it for my podcast episode of Buckeye Sports Breakdown, a show about teams from the great state of Ohio. I'm Mahir Hassan. If you can, enjoy the games this weekend. Have a great weekend. I'll see you next week. And as always, stay safe.